sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi on the Sidelines. This is Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by another legend in the broadcasting business, lead sideline reporter for CBS Network. With the NFL, college basketball has covered multiple Super Bowls and college Final Fours. Joining us live from New Jersey, Tracy Wolfson. Tracy, it's so good to have you on Rabbi on the Sidelines.
Thank you, Rabbi. So it's a pleasure to be here. So excited.
Yes, so we followed you over the many years, and actually, as you can see behind me with Carmelo Anthony, a Syracuse guy here, and 2003 was a big year for us. But to watch you on the sidelines is, I would say, not just legendary and insightful, but an amazing inspiration in terms of the stories that you bring to the public audience. And it's much different, I think, than being, in the booth. So let's begin, as we say, from Ma'alin B'Kodesh V'lo Moridin, that we should go up in holiness and not down. Let's start first with your journey into the sports world, and we'll cross that path of faith very shortly as well. So you have said that your job is not typical, and you have said also that when you were a young girl, you looked at the Madrashah in Willow Bay and said, that's what I'm going to do, and you did it. Not many of us get to simply look at somebody and say, I'm going to do it. So how'd you do it?
Yeah, as I said, it was not a typical path. But first off, when I was, first interested in sports, I was about 7, 8 years old. I was a tomboy. Not sure if we can use that word anymore, but I still say that's, what I was. I was obsessed with sports. I loved playing with it. I loved watching it. My parents would find me in my room being like, what are you doing? I'd be recording myself. It was a dream of mine since I was about 7, 8 years old. And specifically Willow Bay, because she's a woman, and I couldn't imagine that you can do that as a female. The problem was I had no mentors to look up to in terms of trying to reach out and say, how do I do this? How do I go about it? What is the path I should take? And so I really had to find it myself, and went to the University of Michigan, solely, not only, of course, because it was the best academic school that I could get into, but also I knew I'd be surrounded by big time sports and figured that would be a path. As Syracuse grad, Newhouse is really the way that a lot of people enter the business. I didn't even know about Newhouse when I was, going through my path. I didn't have anyone to ask and say, this is what I'm interested in. What should I do? Got to the University of Michigan, and fortunately, the communications department had some internships, and through that, I was able to get a lot of hands-on, experience. And then I was a runner for CBS when they would come and do basketball games and football games, and really was able to get my foot in the door that way. When I say it's not a typical path, it's because when I graduated, I didn't have a tape. So I had absolutely nothing to show to say, this is what I want to do. But people are like, well, how do we know you could do it? Right. So I basically was a researcher for CBS for a year. I left to go be an agent for a year. I was a sports producer for a year. And then I made a fake tape and I sent it all across the country. And I got one job in Trenton, New Jersey. And fortunately, I didn't have to pick up and move across the country like many do. But I made a fake tape. I got my first job, and that opened up the doors for me to get in front of the camera.
So you mentioned about not having a role model in the female world. I've been honored to host one of your mentors, which is Andrea Kramer, on the show as well. But this is what you said when you were interviewed, I believe, last year on a summit by Mark Zumoff from Philadelphia, and the idea of finding a female mentor.
About Willow Bay. She was really one of the few women out there that I was able to really watch and learn from and model myself after. There was no cable network for me, and it was really hard to learn from a female and know and just have role models. So I didn't really grow up with a role model that I was able to kind of feed off of and get advice from and say, how do I manage and navigate all of this? So I really did a lot of that on my own until I joined CBS, and Leslie Visser became a huge role model and a huge help to me. But it is completely different. There were, a handful of women back then, and now every time you turn on the TV, you see women covering sports.
So, what is your message to the younger generation of females who love sports, who want to be the next, not Leslie Visser, but the next Tracy Wolfson? How do they do it?
So first off, find your mentors. I think it's really important. Make your contacts, and that goes really for anyone in any business. Contacts are really going to really help you with the process. They're going to open the door for you. They're going to give advice, and in my business specifically, it's extremely important to have someone you could lean on and ask,
Mhm.
especially as a woman. I mean, there's a lot of women I mentor who don't even navigate, don't know how to navigate being a woman and being a mother and being on the sidelines and traveling every weekend and leaving their families. And there's a lot that
Mhm.
goes into that. So I say to a lot of young women out there, I think, and this goes, like I said, for anyone. First off, be very versatile. Understand that there's so many things out there and be willing to kind of, do a little bit of everything till you find your path. And then I think, second of all, you got to know your stuff. You really do. I mean, this is a business where you're going to be challenged every day and scrutinized. And if you don't know your stuff, you will be exposed, whether you are a woman or a male, but I think more so as a female in this business. And the third thing, it's really simple, and just be a great teammate. Don't
Mhm.
be a diva, be really easy to work with, and, you know, be someone that people wanna work alongside at all times. And I do believe I've had longevity in this business, not because I do a good job. I think that's, of course, part of the reason, but I think also people enjoy working alongside me. People trust
Mhm.
me. Those that I interview, the coaches, the players trust me. They know that I know what I'm talking about. I'm putting my time, I'm putting my research in. I think that's really important. Teamwork, we think about it when it comes to sports, and but obviously in work, and whether it's a temple and what you're doing, or whether it's a business and a corporation, whether it's just a class that you're taking, teamwork is ultimately the most important thing.
So much of what you said, you could be speaking to rabbinical students right now in terms of not just the teamwork, but the scrutinization and what you say really matters in every moment. And not just in the moment, but in fact, with live streaming and every single sermon is now there forever. And so, even though it's live television, it's also archived streaming, which really um, makes you prepare as well in terms of what you want to say and also who your audience as well. So you speak about trust, and not only do the people that work alongside you have the trust, but the athletes seem also have amazing trust in you. You have worked with GOATs, the greatest of all times. And one of those is, of course, Tom Brady. This is an interview that you had with him. And I would love to think about, are you preparing for the moment after the game, even though the game, you don't know what's going to happen? And what does that look like? And this is an interview with Tom Brady.
I mean, you doing what you do best. 44 seconds left and you drive 60 yards down the field. Just take me through what you saw on that final drive.
We made some good plays. Cade made a great catch up the seam to start the drive. Scotty made a few. Then we got in the end zone. Mike got the PI, and then great call by Byron. So it was a great win. Way to go, baby.
It's not just about the words that they say, but it's about the actions that are happening that you can't even expect. Take us to the post-game moments, because you can't prepare for the last second thing, and then all of a sudden you're on live.
No, you can't. You could go in, you are prepared, right? But you can go in with some ideas of how you think it might turn out and what you might ask and what the line of questioning may be. But ultimately, that's all going to go out the window, especially when you have a game like that. And so, I really go in, again, it goes back to really knowing the game. You really have to be in tune with it, what happened, the ebbs and the flows, the pinnacle moments of those games, being able to pick those out and reference those back. And
Mhm.
I always go into a post game interview, and it's kind of like a routine for me. You're going to ask about that pinnacle moment, or that game changing play, and what happened down the stretch, and then you're going to basically talk about maybe a specific player, maybe the play of Tom Brady, or it might be a play of a quarter. I think following up that, I probably did ask about a specific receiver or the defense and how they played. And then afterwards, you're going to kind of do a general wrap up question, in a sense of maybe looking forward, or what does this do to the team, or how did this help you in your standings? So you really go in with an idea, but you never know how the game's going to play out. And especially, certainly, those moments when you have those last second wins, or those drives down the field, or a game, a shot at the buzzer. You have to quickly formulate your questions. And the key thing is getting the emotion out of the
Mm-hmm.
players. And to me, that's the best part. My job is really to just tee it up. It's not about how much I know, not about throwing in as many stats as I can. It's about really giving them a good question so that allows them to speak. It shows their emotion and it gives them the platform because ultimately that's what the fans want to see.
Actually, it's interesting that you say about emotion. My senior rabbi, Rabbi David Wolpe, always says that when you speak to an audience or a congregation, what they're going to remember is how they feel and not necessarily the words and the facts that you tell them. And so bringing emotion out is really is crucial. And then how do you balance, though? Because sometimes you have to ask, I don't want to say controversial questions, but questions
Yeah.
about things that might not be the most comfortable. And then you have to go back to them the next time and say, in a beautiful way, you just won a Super Bowl, but they're going to probably remember that last one. How do you build that trust so that they understand that you're both doing your job and it's also what the public needs to hear?
It's a great question. And you go back to that trust. And I think when I've covered coaches and players over and over again, they've come to the point after 18 years on the sidelines that
Mm-hmm.
they do trust me and they know I'm asking what needs to be asked. And I think it's the way you ask it also. There are always those times, and we get it in basketball. Why didn't you call a timeout? This is after, and by the way, I've done a lot of losing interviews too. Right after they lose the Final Four, I have to go do that interview. Those are the toughest interviews I have to do. And, you really do have to, present that question in the right way and at the right
Mm-hmm.
time. And I always like to give them the chance to answer that question first. And then if they don't answer it, then I ask it. So for example, if down the stretch they didn't call that timeout and you're asking why, and you think that maybe they should have, and that's the rhetoric coming out of the game, what happened down the stretch? Let them say, I should have called a timeout. And if they
Mm-hmm.
don't say that, then you follow up, was there a thought of taking a timeout there? And I think that's the most important thing to keep the trust. Ask, believe me, you have to ask the questions that need to be asked, or else you're the
Mm-hmm.
one who's going to look, silly out there. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to say, why didn't she ask that question? You have to ask those tough questions. But I've come to the fact that I actually relish being in those moments because it does challenge you. And as long as you hold your ground and you do ask the right question in a respectful manner, you should get the best possible response.
So you
And
said it's
they should understand that.
So you said the role of the reporter is to tee it up, and I know I'm interviewing a reporter, so that walked right into this next clip because one of those people that you interviewed, which I would say is a hero in the basketball world, but also in the American sports scene, is Coach K. And you had the opportunity to interview him at the last moment after he lost to UNC his last game. And this is what you said, and I think it has a moment of faith, and we're going to cross that line right now.
Coach, as you walked off the court for the final time, can you describe the emotions that you were feeling?
Just for my players, I'll deal with me later. For me, my entire time coaching, I always wanted at the end of the year or whatever the last game is, where you're either crying for joy or you're crying for sorrow. And if you are, that means you've put everything into it. And I have a bunch of kids who are crying, and I'm proud of them. They've been a joy to coach, and they've played winning basketball, and they did tonight too, but so did the other team.
That is such a not only Jewish message, but theological message that basically the book of Ecclesiastes says, we read that on Sukkot, there's a time to cry, there's a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to cry, a time to laugh. And he nailed it. That locker room, every March Madness, one shining moment is like a Yom Kippur moment for me. That not everybody's gonna cry for joy, but most people are gonna cry for tears. So in that moment of Coach K, knowing that it was the last time you stepped off that floor, I was crying watching you. How do you come up with that moment, and what does Coach K mean to the college basketball scene even today?
It was a really emotional moment for me as well. And I'll take you back because I talked about being a researcher for CBS. I talked about my senior year when I was a runner for CBS. One of the opportunities I got as a senior at the University of Michigan was to cover March Madness in the Final Four. I went to New York, I did March Madness, and then I got the opportunity to be in Indianapolis, cover the Final Four. And who was there but Coach K and his Duke team? They didn't win it that year. That was Arizona. But my job was to pick Coach K and his wife Mickey up from the airport.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the first time I met Coach K. And so our relationship started then, and then to then finally live out my dream, get on the air and have that moment where that's the bookend of his
Mhm.
career. And Mickey, his wife, when I finally got in the air and she was at a Final Four that I was at, I went over to her and I'm like, Mickey, I don't know if you remember. She goes, "Oh my God, you actually lived, out your dream, what you wanted to do.
Wow.
Congrats." So I've had a lot of moments with Mike Krzyzewski, been through a lot of his ups and his downs, and followed his whole career and respect him so much. And there's that trust factor again. And, a lot of people are very nervous to interview him or be around him. And certainly in that moment, I knew that moment was going to come. It would
Mhm.
have been a storybook ending for them to win the whole thing and not have that as so-called losing interview
Right.
after the game. So I was definitely conscious of when that moment was going to be and what the tone should be and what the question should be. And I'm going to tell you, I thought we'd do one question and let him talk and leave because I
Mhm.
didn't want to intrude on that moment. He was so gracious and he stood there for, several minutes and allowed me to kind of keep going. And I had to kind of go off the fly there because I didn't know when he wanted to wrap it up, and he seemed like he just wanted to stick around and savor that moment also, and that was a special one. I appreciate you, putting that up there because I haven't seen it
Mm.
since then, and it brought back a lot of memories, and definitely emotional one for me as well.
So it wasn't Ernie in your ear saying, "Tracy, we're done," or keep it going.
No, usually a lot of times they just have me record those and they don't
Oh,
talk to
interesting.
me or anything. So if I remember correctly, I think that one might have gone directly to the studio, but whatever it was, there was no one in my ear saying wrap
Mm.
up or next question or ask them about this. I think they just trusted me in that moment, and I
I know, and
appreciated it.
in those moments, even after a loss, you see the humanity of these human beings. And one of those people that I really do look up to and has been a very good family friend of ours is Coach Boeheim. I know with the media, it's a little different sometimes, especially after, thankfully, we won one and got the horse off our back in 2003. But maybe speak of a person like him who I saw him actually as a brother of a special needs individual, what he did for our family and the community, and people like Coach K and people like Roy Williams. Maybe see what humanity have you seen off the court that really even should encourage us to say that sports is not just about what you see on the court, but it's really about making a difference in this world?
No doubt. And I think you see that. You see the individuals and coaches and people that they are off the court all the time. And, I don't get a chance to spend a lot of time with these coaches away from the court, but
Hmm.
I certainly, read and hear and watch as much as I can. And you see whether they're wearing sneakers to raise money for
Yep.
cancer or My Cause, My Cleats in the NFL right now, where they're trying to bring attention to certain organizations they're involved in. And you can pick out every coach out there that has a cause that they truly believe in. And they are special off the field. You talked about Ernie Johnson and the
Hmm.
things that he has done and how he's influenced your life and a mentor and a friend that he is to you. And I mean, he's just a perfect example, not a coach, but
Human
a
being.
national figure, a personality that does so many incredible things that you wouldn't know because you just watch him maybe on TNT, during those pregame, and postgame shows. So I do think there's so much of that. You bring up Bayheim, and there are several coaches I always get nervous about interviewing. And fortunately, over the years, they've mellowed out with me. But he was one I remember in the beginning, I was so nervous to ask him questions at halftime. And now, in those last few years, he's been great coming over and, just talking and loose. And, again, it's that respect factor and that trust you built over time. I work with Bill Raftery, another
Yeah,
guy
love him.
who, the best of the best, salt of the earth. And he's got these relationships with
Yep.
Bayheim and with Jay Wright. And I can go down the list. And that helps things as well, no
We
doubt.
just got
So,
to make it clear that Julie Boeheim definitely helped in those aspects with the media. Is that correct?
oh, she's fabulous.
And what
She's the
she has
best.
done in the community with the Jim and Julie Boeheim Foundation, unbelievable and truly a mentor to follow in all the work that we do as well.
Yeah, and
So
I think you're right, Will. And one other thing, I think that they have this platform just like players do, but coaches
Mhm.
do have a platform also. And I think the fact that, they can take advantage of that. People look up to it and see that they're not just coaches or maybe curmudgeons at times, or guys who are cursing in huddles, but they really do have a life and a personality and a family and a cause off the court, off the field as well.
And so another piece of your life outside of the sidelines reporting is your Jewish piece. And you can simply go online and find your commitment specifically to the Kaplan JCC in the Palisades, I believe. Tell us about that Jewish journey first, and then we're going to maybe see if they do intersect and how those intersect in a deep way.
Yeah, I grew up Jewish. Both of my parents. I was very interested in the Jewish culture and Hebrew school. I was Reform, went to a Reform temple, but I really loved it. I was passionate about it. I always enjoyed my time in Hebrew school. I love the traditions.
Everybody hear that? Tracy Wolfson
I
enjoyed
did.
her
I was
time
a
in
total
Hebrew
nerd.
school.
I was a complete nerd. I mean, my 3 boys go to Hebrew school now, and believe me, they will complain sometimes when they have to go. But I loved it. I embraced it. I love the traditions that Judaism brings, and that's what it is: family traditions. I always loved the holidays and being with my family and the cousins and all together making Passover. And my family's one side of my family is Yemenite, so bringing in those Yemenite traditions was really meaningful, especially in Passover. And so I've tried to carry that over time with my family as well, and my 3 boys. I think it's really important, and I want to make sure that when they go off and start a family, that they have their own traditions and they realize how important faith is. And it doesn't mean you have to be in temple every Friday, because I cannot be in temple every Friday. And believe me, I was just talking to my mom about this the other day, is Shabbat to me, I wish that I had the opportunity to have Shabbat every Friday. I'm always gone on the road. It's a tradition I wish we had with our family, because I love it. But I do see so many friends that do get that opportunity to really just spend that time on Fridays together, Jen Osfeld being one of them. But unfortunately, my life doesn't work that way, but that's okay. And even if I may miss a holiday or, a bar mitzvah, I make sure that we make up for that time together. So it's really important to me getting involved in the JCC as well. I was on a board for a very long time. I'm slowly rolling off to that. Just got involved with Israel lacrosse, bringing lacrosse to Israel. My son was just there in February on a service trip as well through the Federation, the Jewish Federation here. So I'm finding other ways to stay involved and also pass it on to my kids.
So you mentioned Israel, and obviously you're in the college basketball world, and what Bruce Pearl's doing with Athletes for Israel is amazing. And actually, when he played, USC played Auburn, I called Coach Pearl and said, there is no way that you're coming to Los Angeles and not coming to Sinai Temple. And he came after practice, and he came into the Kiddush, and people are like, who is this guy? We're all wearing suits, and he's wearing an Auburn sweatsuit. And he said, I'm Coach Bruce Pearl, but right now I am Mordechai Ben Dov. And he explained his connection to his grandfather in Poland that did not have in Israel. And he said, there's no way that that's not going to happen again. And last year, of course, he brought Jay Billis to Israel. And Jay had been on the show previously, and he said, I'm not a man of faith. And when Jay went to Israel, I called him. I said, Jay, you're coming back on the show because what you did is so much more than simply a basketball game and floating in the Dead Sea. So when you see guys like Bruce Pearl, and now actually, I believe Syracuse and Kansas, I believe, are going this summer to Israel. What is that connection in terms of showing these athletes, mostly African-American Christian athletes, the joy and the importance of what Judaism can bring, not just to the sports world, but to the world? And like you said, their platform, they can use that platform to bring people together and not divide them.
I think it's fabulous what Bruce Pearl has been doing. And I think you're going to see more and more teams doing that. It is a way to bond. And it's not just Judaism, as you mentioned. There's so many religions and cultures that intersect in Israel. And I think anyone can take away from that. But they could also, it's a chance for them to learn about Judaism as well, learn about Israel, and learn about, all the history that is involved. And Bruce Pearl and I covered him this year in the tournament, and we had a conversation earlier and then came back, and I brought up our conversation. This was all live on TV, and he goes, I'm so glad that we could kibitz, because I remember about our conversation earlier. And I love that he's throwing out some words out there. And so he is a mensch, no doubt. And I do think it's great that, sports and Judaism and culture and Israel and And all religions can kind of intersect. It doesn't really matter, what your faith is, but faith in general, I think, is really important personally. Everyone doesn't believe in it, but personally, faith is important to me. And I rely on that a lot, especially during hard times, when I'm on the road, when I'm struggling, when I'm stressed, when I miss my family, or when we are spending and celebrating together, whether it is a bar mitzvah. I took my oldest son, we went to Israel for his bar mitzvah, and that was an
Oh, wow.
extremely, extremely special moment. And I can't wait to go back.
When was that?
That was 2000. He's 17 now, so that's 4 years ago.
And so the Bruce Pearl is actually fascinating because it was last year when the Ukraine war had just started. On the dais of March Madness, he told the story of Purim and his name being Mordechai and what that meant in relation. And it went viral, not because it was March Madness, but because he had the platform in that moment to actually do that as well. So it's a beautiful thing to see from our community that leads to a greater thing as well. When you talk about faith in sports and your journey, we're obviously talking on a quote unquote rabbinic show. But does that journey ever come out either live, and not live, but on the air or behind the scenes in terms of who you are in that faith aspect as well? I mean, this year we talked about Kyrie Irving and what he did. And actually it was Ernie Johnson that reached out that said, we need a rabbi to talk about this on the show. And I don't think there had been a rabbi on Inside the NBA before. And it was a very proud moment that faith was coming, not in somebody's face, but as I said in that moment, it's a time to engage and not disengage. Are there moments at all over that career that said, you know what, this is who I am and this is how I need to speak out right now?
It's interesting you said that. We did have a moment during I don't speak on those issues because that's not my platform. I usually am on a sideline covering a game, so it doesn't really, come into play, let's say. Unless, of course, someone is fasting for Yom Kippur and not playing. If that was a story, we would be discussing it. We had that with Ramadan.
They should be in Hebrew school.
Right.
Yeah, this past year, 2 UConn players fasting a Ramadan. I thought that was unbelievable.
Yes, exactly. So that was no doubt covered. I do have a show called We Need to Talk, and it's an all-female sports show, but we have a lot of different, cultures and religions and people in different positions and former, Olympic athletes, gold medalists, CEOs, you name it, all on the show that come together with different backgrounds. And so that show sometimes provides us the opportunity to talk about our faith or talk about the opinion. We did have a show where we were going to talk about Kyrie, and Lisa Leslie said to me, I always have to speak on, being an African, being Black and what it means in this world and the struggles that I've had. How come you can't talk on Kyrie and how it affects you? And I was so appreciative of her saying that to me. It really meant a lot. And she's right, and I was very passionate. I almost was too passionate that I was hesitant to talk on it. I didn't know where it would go. And I became really emotional about it. And I didn't know where that came from. And I think it was partially because I'm not used to speaking on those issues. It was different for me. It was uncomfortable for me, and not uncomfortable to speak on being Jewish, uncomfortable on tackling those issues on a national platform, because that's not normally my role. And we were ready to tackle that issue. And then with timing, there was going to be something coming out. I think he was speaking with the NBA, Kyrie, that day, and the timing of the show would not have worked if we talked about it at that moment. So we wound up, scrapping that whole segment. But we had a very good, open conversation amongst all of us on that show with differences of opinions. Right. And everyone had a difference of opinion. Lisa and I had a different opinion. Summer Sanders and I had a different opinion. I think maybe Aditi Kinkabwala was on the show. She had a different opinion. So we did all spend that time sharing, which was really good for me. It was good to just talk about it openly, in a different, like I said, in a different forum, rather than just sitting around with my friends and my family discussing it. I think that was a growth period for me, no doubt.
That same day I was in the NBA studios, and they called, and I walked in, and it was Vince Carter, Richard Jefferson, Malika Andrews, and Shanae Ogomike. And off the air, Shanae goes, "Rabbi, I want to let you know my best friend is Catholic, my best friend is Jewish, and there is nothing like a Shabbat dinner." And then Vince Carter says, "Rabbi, my mom's very involved in the Episcopalian Church in Daytona." And I was like, guys, these are the stories that you with your platforms need to share, because I'm not the expert in your field on the sports field, and I'm at your desk right now. I'm more of the expert in the religious field, but these are combining. And it's interesting because, when people hear a rabbi talk about sports, say, oh, it's, a cute little thing. But actually Solomon Schechter, the first conservative rabbi in America, said that you can't be a rabbi in this country without speaking about baseball. And he didn't mean just sports, but he meant the American experience is interwoven with sports. And it seems like, at least for all the people that I've spoken to over the last 2 years, and they are major figures in your world, say that there are elements in the world of sports that are very faith-based that couldn't happen without it, whether it's team camaraderie, sacredness in the locker room, or what you have. So what avenue or what aspects of faith have you seen in those locker rooms or on those courts, besides simply thanking the Lord above after a win? Because as Dave Sims told me, the guy in left field is often not thanking God for dropping the the pop-up as well.
Yeah, I mean, you do see that often, but it takes. I think there's a lot of pregame prayer, there's a lot of postgame prayer, there's a lot of prayer during practice, but it's not about what faith you are. It's really all coming together, joining hands, doing something together, having a conversation. I think there's a lot of that. And during all this, whether it was anti-Semitism, whether it was the riots, whether it's a black and white issue, there's been so much open conversation in locker rooms, more and more. And I think that's so important, so that teams are on the same page. We saw with Colin Kaepernick how it divided a lot of teams, how everyone needed to come together. The NFL, there was a lot of division going through it at that time, and there still is. And it's just about communication, being open, and whether it means coming together, holding hands and thanking God, or or just finding that time to really get on that same page. I think there are so many intertwined thoughts and ideas between sports and faith, and especially when you're about to go onto a court and you want to believe. Just believe. It doesn't matter what you believe in, just believe. I think that word is very strong. It's thrown out there a lot. But it doesn't mean you have to believe in in God, or a certain God, or your faith. It just means you have to believe. And I think it's a way of getting everyone together on the same page. And we talked about teamwork. We talked about teams. Those teams that are all on the same, in the same belief of their team, like just the same faith of their team. Those are the best. Those are the best teams out there. And it doesn't matter what talent level you have. I see it on the sidelines all the time. If they're not all intertwined, if they're not all on the same page, they're never going to be successful. It doesn't matter if you have the best quarterback out there. But if everyone's not on the same page, it's going to be, it's going to be a really difficult season. And
And when you talk about belief and faith in March Madness, a 16 versus 1, if that's not faith and belief with was FAU this year, and St. Peter's last year. Take us through the role of a 16 Cinderella and the role of faith and belief after they win that first game, that they can keep going and going and going.
Well, I did the first one when Virginia lost to UMBC. That was the first time a 16 had beaten a 1. And speaking of faith, Tony Bennett is one of the, he is a very faithful, really, believes in the power of prayer. And I remember watching it. He's one of my favorite coaches to sit outside the huddle and watch. First of all, he's the nicest guy on the planet. He really
You're
is.
not the first person to say this on the show. So hopefully Coach Bennett will be on the show shortly.
He is the nicest guy. And I felt an immediate connection with him. And you watch him and you could see his belief. You can see his faith. You can see his pride. You could see it. And it just emanates from him. He has this it's the weirdest thing. I tell everyone, he has this aura about him. But in that moment, at the end of that game, it was like the players and him, it was blank. There was nothing there. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting for it. And you didn't see it. There was no one standing up and saying something. It was really quiet. And you can sense, all the momentum had shifted and they couldn't get it back. And so they had faith, that 16 seed UMBC, they had faith. They all came together, even though no one believed. And that's when the number 1 goes down. That's just how it is. And yeah, you continue to have the faith to keep it going. Sometimes it does, and sometimes, the talent and the disparity just catch up to you. But there is, something really special when it comes to that, believing and that faith and how far it can get you, especially in a tournament like that.
Well, the biggest thing about that game is made me forget about Syracuse Richmond 15-2 as a little child. So there's some
We've all
PTSD in
been
that moment.
subject to that. Yeah.
Go back to football for a second, because this idea of faith comes often in tragedy. I'm just going to go to Pittsburgh for a moment, when Stay Stronger Together, when the Tree of Life shooting happened and the Steelers and the NFL decided to do something like that. Bob Kraft, who gives $75 million to fight anti-Semitism right now. And even the Panthers of the Pitt basketball team, I was watching Syracuse Pitt during that a couple months after, and each one of them right here on their jersey had a Magen David, a Jewish star. And I reached out to Coach Tim O'Toole, the assistant at Pitt at that time, who had been at Syracuse when I was a kid. And I said, again, same thing. What that small thing means so much more than just this basketball game. So maybe take us back to some of these tragedies, that, or like when I interviewed Dan Schulman and he announced on the air that Osama bin Laden was caught. That these moments of sports when millions of people are watching are often times when world events happen and you and your colleagues are in charge of announcing it to the world. Are there moments of that you have been a part of, and what it meant for you to bring people together in those moments?
Yeah, and it's our job to also to bring, the attention to all of these, tragedies, these issues when we're on this public forum, and doing it in the right manner, doing it, unfortunately, we don't have that much time when you're covering a game. It's the one thing that's really difficult, is that you want to dig in a little deep. You want to do an interview, you want to really speak on it, or talk about a story that a player is involved, who might have been involved in the Tree of Life, who might have been involved in a mass shooting, who might have had a cousin or a friend, or who donated a ton of money. It's hard to get those stories out. Usually it comes on our pregame show. It's a great forum for that. We can do that before. We could do a sit down. We can dedicate the time and the attention to it. Bob Kraft has become a really good friend of mine, having, covered the Patriots so many times, especially when Brady was there. And what he's done, I think, has been incredible. Not only
he just went on March of the Living to Poland a couple of weeks ago.
He really, it is, and I think it's, everyone sees it, so that's they feed off of that as well. And we just went through the same thing with what happened with Damar Hamlin on the sideline, and so I didn't do that game, but I did the next 3 games that followed it, and I was in Buffalo for those 2 games directly afterwards, and it was a lot. It was extremely emotional. It was, a lot of work trying to make sure you convey the right ideas and what's exactly happening, and also showing the support and how the NFL all came together. And I think that's so important with what's going on in our world right now, that sports can all come together. Players can come together, coaches, teams can come together, and during tragedies, during tough moments. And I think that's what's really nice about it, unifying everyone. And it also provides entertainment. And sometimes you just need that. I had Joe Torre on the show, on our We Need to Talk show, and we talked about 9/11 and getting back to play baseball right after. And if you remember, the Yankees were a huge part of that.
I was in New York during that year. Yep.
He said we just needed it. We needed to do that, for our country. And so I think there's a lot to that too, as the sports world just tries to provide, some entertainment and take our minds off all the difficulties happening in our world right now.
No, and some of those stories are just so uplifting. In fact, that was the reason why I did reach out to Ernie, because in 2020 during COVID, he told a beautiful story about Michael, his son of blessed memory. And I reached out saying, you have no idea who I am, but you touched my soul and I need to talk to you. And we became acquaintances since. And even the story this past year didn't get so much attention, but the Steve Fisher's son on the sidelines of San Diego State, who is, as I forgot what the disease is right now, ALS.
Yeah.
And the first time he traveled, I mean, those stories are what says, you know what, Aztecs all the way. How do you find those stories, and as you said, in that limited amount of time, decide to tell me those stories to say this is really what matters?
Yeah. So, basically, first off, it goes through all the research that we do. I mean, you, especially during March Madness, you really don't have a lot of time, because you don't know who's going to win, and you have about 2 or 3 days to regroup, and that Sunday when you get all of your 8 teams, I mean, you have to prepare for 8 teams in 4 days. That's probably the most challenging, but those games, especially during March Madness early on, you want to tell stories because especially a lot of those teams you're not going to see again. They might
Hmm.
be a 15, 16, 14 seed that you've never even heard of the school. You don't even know where the school is. And they have so many stories to tell. And that's your goal is to, bring, humanize these players and really show what they do off the field and off the, off the court for that matter. And so with Steve Fisher, and I'm a Michigan grad, I know
Hmm.
him well. I know the story well. I've been involved in, there's a basketball, the alumni basketball team at Michigan raises money every year for ALS because of
Nice.
Steve Fisher and his son. And so they were around us for that whole week. And it was really good that we can figure out ways to get that story. And you have to do it as a team. So
Hmm.
Jim Nantz is the best storyteller in television. So he might be the one to, start it. And I might be able to add, this is what he's doing on the sideline, while he's a full on coach, by the
Hmm.
way. And
Hmm.
it was his first time traveling, but he normally is at home texting and getting information and saying what he's seeing. And so I think you all just work together to try and fit that story in. And if you don't have the time on the sidelines, it's okay to get it done in the booth. That's really the role of the producer, trying to find the best possible way of getting these stories in without taking away from too much of the game. And in basketball, it's such a quick game. It's really hard to find those moments to tell those stories because next thing there's a big decisive three and we missed the moment.
Hmm.
So you really have to find the right timing of it. But you work together as a team, the guys in the booth and myself on the sideline.
And so back to the ordinary to conclude our program today. We're a split synagogue here, and not Ashkenazic and Sephardic, but actually Trojans and Bruins. So how do we deal with that this year? What do you see as UCLA USC transition to the Big Ten with now Bronny and Dennis Rodman's son coming over to USC? What do you see out west for us in the year ahead and the research that you have to do now based on the transfer portal and NIL? That's insanity. So what does the basketball year look like ahead? I know you're just starting the NFL piece.
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be very interesting because again, being a Michigan grad and now having USC and UCLA, which I'm happy that there's the two rivalries. You bring another rivalry, and I think it's going to be great. But the travel, I don't know
Yeah,
how
they're
that's
long
going to all
flights.
work, especially with students. I mean, it is a lot. And who else? You don't know how many other teams are going to wind up, coming in realignment, Pac-12, Big 12, Big
Hmm.
10. What's going to happen? But I do think it'll be fun. It'll be unique. It'll be different to see, all of a sudden USC and UCLA in the Big Ten playing these teams. But I have no idea. I mean, I'm just excited for something different. I think change is good. It's just a matter of how you go about it. The transfer portal is definitely changing the game. NIL is changing the game. And there's a lot of adjustment, especially in college, basketball and football, that needs to take place. And we'll see where it goes. But, I think realignment is no doubt happening. You're going to wind up with, 3 big conferences and, a bigger college playoff, as we know, is on the horizon. I'm excited to see Bronny. I'm excited to see Dennis's son. Who knows what happens in March Madness? It'll be fun.
And what about the NFL? Now that Brady is officially retired for the second time and just sort of a new crop of talent coming up here, any changes also going forward in the NFL that we can look for? I know, most of the kids are in Hebrew schools. I know they watch you after, but NFL this year, what should we expect?
Oh, it's quarterback centric, no doubt. And I'm in the AFC. I'm in the AFC being on CBS. So that's what we cover the most. And so, I mean, think about the teams in the AFC. You could talk about the East and Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets. I'm a Jets fan, since I was, 6, 7 years old, been watching the Jets. So never believed we'd actually have a team that we could root for and be excited for, and maybe potentially have a chance to make the playoffs. Not going to talk Super Bowl yet, but love Aaron Rodgers coming to the Jets. Think it's a really good thing for him. I think the AFC East is stacked between Buffalo. You got Miami and Tua. Of course, you got always the Patriots. I mean, you have all these young quarterbacks. Joe Burrow and Cincinnati, what they've been able to do. Patrick Mahomes, one of the best players I've been around. Really salt of the earth guy, what he's done in Kansas City. I have 8 games in Kansas City this year. I mean,
Wow.
I'm going to just take up residency there.
Well, we'll find you a local synagogue too.
Please do, please do. And we will be out, I think, in California. I think we'll be, we have a Chargers game out there.
Oh, nice.
So that should be fun. And, I think it's just going to be, it's going to be really competitive, especially on that AFC side. It'll be a fun season. It'll have, a lot of talent, and, how these teams are going to emerge at the end of the year remains to be seen. But that's what gets me excited. I still got a few months off. This is my quiet time, so I don't like to necessarily dig in, but I know that August is going to be here before we know it, and I'm going to be so ready to get on that plane and get back to football for week 1.
Well, Tracy Wolfson, I'm going to leave you with the words of Rabbi Moses Maimonides, and that would be Ani Ma'amin. It means I believe, because all the stories that you have told are really about belief, that anything can happen with that faith and belief, but most importantly, it takes teamwork, it takes effort, it takes partnership to not just simply bring entertainment, but also bring inspiration of these amazing stories to this world. Tracy Wolfson, lead sideline reporter for CBS, the NFL, college basketball, college football. We are so honored that you took the time to join us and Rabbi on the Sidelines. When you're out here with the Chargers, make sure that Sinai Temple is your home, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it.